everyone, and welcome to the Charles Billingsley podcast. We are so glad that you joined us here on another season. We're well already into this next season. Charles, good to see you.
Yes, we are. Thanks. Yes, we are into this season. I can't believe it. This fall season, we got the Dallas Cowboys. We got
really
weather.
That's the first thing that comes to your mind.
Well, yeah, because it's football. Football's starting.
Adam, good to see you as well.
Sorry, I probably should have waited for the introduction.
No, you jumped.
No, and this is Adam Lancaster.
He triggered me with
Washington Redskins / Commanders / new owners / gonna lose again.
I just have to say, this is the season for the Ravens. I just want to say, get ready.
Please.
We've got the Ravens coming.
You say that every year. You know, it's just, of course I've been saying it every year for the Cowboys for 32 years or something. So it's been a long life, actually.
Pot calling the kettle right there.
But, it's who knows? If Dak can keep the interceptions down, we're going to be all right. So anyway, welcome back, everybody. Yeah. Hey, and here's the thing. We have lots of guests coming up this fall that are really awesome. But today may be one of my favorites, my absolute favorites.
Really? And why?
Well, because he actually worked with us on staff at Thomas Road for, I don't know, a short season.
A minute.
And he was a huge encouragement to me. And, I can be a little, I don't know. There's a little.
Which word do you want me to insert there?
A little bit overextended at times with too many things going on. And Lance Witt helped me on two different occasions, actually, just to be my life coach. And then if I ever really have a big issue, I still call him, because he's really talked me through, leaving here one time when I went to San Diego, leaving San Diego and coming back here. We did a lot. He's done a lot of life coaching for me. He's a wonderful life coach. And that's one of the things.
Has it made a difference? That's, I guess.
Well, I mean, yes. When I actually do what he suggested I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mean there was times you ignored him?
No, I would never ignore him.
He would just
perhaps
forget.
I just didn't fulfill
the full extent.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But who's the first to tell me that I didn't is my wife. Shay has a wonderful way of reminding me that I'm not doing anything that Lance told me. So, anyway, we're honored to have him because Lance is just so wise. He's so gifted at what he does. He was a huge help to us here at Thomas Road in team building and our mission and our vision statements and all these things. But he's a life coach. He's a writer. He has a brand new book that's just been out for a little short time. He's authored 3 books, but he worked with Saddleback Church in San Diego in California with Rick Warren for many years in their big purpose-driven life days. And he's just done all kinds of things. And he's a consultant for many large churches around the country. So this guy is just a guru when it comes to team building and to building your own life. So I'm excited to introduce him.
Yeah. And we will right after this break.
Welcome back, everybody. Hey, listen, so excited to introduce you to my friend, Lance Witt. He is one of my favorite people on the planet, and he's incredibly just brilliant in so many ways, but humble too. Humble. Just so humble. So let's bring him on. Let's bring him on. Lance, what's up?
Hey, guys. Thanks so much for letting me be a part of this today. I am honored to just hang out with the 3 of you. And I really am. And Charles, I just love the friendship we've had through the years and appreciate that very gracious introduction. That's very kind of you.
Well, it's true. And we do love you, man. And then your wife, Connie, and we loved having you here on the team at Thomas Road. It was a short thing because you got family out there in Colorado where you live. And I'll be honest with you, I'm jealous sometimes because he lives in one of my favorite towns in the world, Castle Rock, Colorado. Wow. Awesome place. Out there. Everything, weather, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, Lance, we want to start, I guess, by just asking you to tell us your story. Like, how did you get doing what you're doing? Where did it all begin in the Saddleback days? Tell us a little bit about those crazy days of the purpose-driven life circus, and then we'll move in from there to some advice that you have for for everybody who's listening as far as just the management of their own lives and careers?
Yeah, so the quick backstory is I got married really young. I was 19. I became a senior pastor at the age of 23, and I always feel like I should go back and apologize to my first church because I was full of ambition and zeal, but not much knowledge or wisdom. And unfortunately, they had to be the recipients of my learning from all my mistakes. But I senior pastored for 20 years. I think my life as a senior pastor was pretty typical of a lot of young senior pastors who loved God, felt called of God, wanted to make a difference with their life, and trying to learn how to pastor people well and grow a thriving church. And then in 1999, it's a much longer story, but was invited to join the staff at Saddleback Church. At first, I was the pastor of discipleship. I then took on small groups. And they asked me to take on leading these campaigns that they did, one called 40 Days of Faith. And so then Rick wrote the book, Purpose Driven Life, when I was there in 2002, and everything changed. Our church exploded in growth. We went from an average weekend attendance of about 16,000 to 2 years later, we were running around 24,000. We went from about 500 small groups to over 2,000 small groups during that season. And Rick became a global celebrity. He was not only trying to pastor our local church, but literally pastor the world. And the demands on him were incredible. And so I always tell people that season of my life was both the most intoxicating and toxic all at the same time. It was an amazing rocket ride of ministry influence because the church was influencing the world. But it was also a season of a lot of pressure and chaos. The pace of my life was out of control. It played out sometimes in some pretty ugly ways at home because I just wasn't present for Connie or our kids. My soul wasn't doing well. And I just wasn't leading myself very well. And so after being there about 7 years, just finally began to feel like I don't think I can keep doing this. Like I needed something different, and way more than a different kind of ministry. I needed a different kind of life because it felt like in those days that sort of just how I was living and everything around me just was soul crushing. And so again, it's a much longer story, Charles, but finally came to this conclusion after Rick and I had 4 pretty lengthy conversations together. And by that time, I was the executive pastor over all the ministries of the church. And so I was in, the senior leadership team of the church. But I just told him, I said, I just think I need to leave. And I didn't have another place to go, and walked away really uncertain about what was next. And I just knew that I had to do something to bring my own soul back to life. And so again, I was 46 years old, felt lost, wasn't sure what was going to happen. And I was on a plane ride to Singapore. I was scheduled to speak at a conference. This was after I left Saddleback, about 2 or 3 months. And I just remember it was the middle of the night, and I just felt lost was the only word I can use. And I just remember everybody else on the plane is asleep. And I just said to God that night, what am I supposed to do in this season of my life? I thought I'd just go back and be a senior pastor. That's what I'd known. But my wife had kind of encouraged me. She said, I think when you pray, you need to be open that God may have something different for you. And so I've had very few mystical experiences in my life. But on that airplane ride that night, when I cried out in that prayer, God met me so clearly, so powerfully. I didn't hear an audible voice, but man, it was so clear in my spirit that God said to me these words: I want you to help leaders be healthy, holy, and humble. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I could give my whole life to that. Like, that resonated with my spirit. I had no idea what that would look like practically, but that was the beginning of the seeds that would eventually become the ministry I do now, called Replenish. And kind of the tagline I use is, we want to help leaders live and lead from a healthy soul. And I think the order of that's important. Like, it does start with, you got to get your own life in order, and then out of a healthy life, actually lead ministry from a healthy place. And so For the last 17 years now, I've been doing Replenish, working with pastors, business leaders, teams around the country, trying to help them discover how to live from that healthy place and then do ministry out of an overflow of being in love with Jesus and a great family life and a great rhythm of life. And so that's what I've been doing. So hopefully that's probably way more than you wanted to know, but that's the short story.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. Can we go back a little bit? Can we just rewind just a little bit? Because so many people know Rick Warren. So many people know about the purpose-driven life. You had to lead a lot of that there at the campus and kind of be the example to the country, right?
Yeah, we were not only leading our own church and all the growth that we were going through, with purpose-driven life and just weekend attendance exploding, adding services, launching small groups. But when we launched 40 Days of Purpose, Rick invited pastors who would like to be part of the pilot project to go through that campaign, but be 1 week behind us. So we were not only preparing our own church, but 1,500 churches went through the campaign in the pilot phase with us. So the enormity of the requests and the demands were unlike anything any of us had ever seen.
How did you deal with that, both personally and professionally?
That took a lot of front end planning.
Oh my!
Yeah, and that was not a strength of ours. We were a reactionary kind of culture. I remember we were 6 weeks out from launching the campaign. I was meeting with my campaign team, and Rick kind of burst through the door and he goes, "Hey, got something I need to share with you this morning in my quiet time. God let me know that we were not showing enough faith with this campaign, and that we need to show exponential faith. And the way we're going to define exponential is we're going to add a zero. So whatever goals you guys had, I want you to add a zero." So we had a goal of launching 300 small groups, and Rick said, "Okay, the goal now is to launch 3,000." Well, that's 6 weeks out. And so it flipped our entire strategy. We had to start looking at anybody in the church as a potential small group leader or host. And so we didn't launch 3,000, but we did launch 2,150 groups or so during that campaign. So it did help. We hired a bunch of people to run the purpose-driven team, but we on the church side were the ones who had the experience of knowing how to do campaigns. And so we had to provide a lot of the resourcing and training and like, here's how you launch a small group. Here's how you do a campaign. So it was a pretty intense time.
Wow. Awesome. But as all those kind of times are, you learn a tremendous amount of things.
Yeah.
But my guess is, in order to really define what you learned, you had to step back and do some real soul searching and some thinking, and in a sense, replenish your own soul.
Well, in those days, I had no clue how to replenish my own soul. Like, it was so drained, so empty. I had, growing up a good Baptist, I had focused my whole life on doing and serving and, accomplishing and trying to succeed and grow the kingdom. And so the whole idea of like paying attention to my soul and my being was something pretty foreign to me in those days. And so it took quite a while to, I think, really discover like, who am I and what does it mean to pay attention to my soul? And I'll tell you guys a quick short story that was sort of a defining moment for me. Like I said, the people who paid the highest price maybe were my family. And I remember Connie was a pretty good sport most of the time about the pace of our lives. But occasionally when she had just had enough and was fed up, we'd have one of those come to Jesus meetings. And, she was Jesus in that conversation. Mm-hmm. And Charles knows her. She's pretty direct, pretty blunt.
Yeah,
and
she is.
And she would just say things like, and we'd had this conversation many times, but she would say, you're just never here. And even when you're here, you're not really here. And the kids don't see you. I certainly don't get time with you. Even when you're home, you're always on your phone. You're always on an email. You just work all the time. And I would just, and I remember I would just kind of play my victim card and go, babe, this just comes with the territory. Like, God's up to something in our church and we have to respond, and it's ministry, and it just goes. And she would go, just stop. She goes, it never changes. Because I would say, oh, it's just for a season. And she would go, it never changes. And I remember we had this one argument, and with tears in her eyes and a lot of anger in her voice, she just said to me, there's always a reason or a season why you can't be who you're supposed to be. And man, I can still feel the emotion of that even all these years later. But it was like the gut kick that I really needed to realize, like, I was who I was because of the choices I was making. No one was holding a gun to my head. I was who I was because the decisions I was making. And that began sort of okay, I got to be ridiculously in charge of my life, right? I'm responsible. And so that's what caused me to, eventually just step away, because I knew I had to have a change. I wasn't going to be able to fix that in that environment with the way I was living.
So you speak of you had a drained soul. What are some things that lead to a drained soul?
Yeah, this is something Charles and I have had a lot of conversation about through the years. When you're overextended, overscheduled, people pleaser. I think, those tend to be things that drain your soul. A lot of conflict and stress, lack of things that bring delight in your life will certainly drain your soul. Sometimes it's spiritual warfare. But I always, tried to live my life as though I didn't have the same limits as everybody else. And I think one of the things I'm learning over this last 17 years is that I need to embrace my limits as a gift from God. And when I try to live beyond my limits, then I end up draining my soul. And some people who are listening to this podcast, they have limits because they have small children at home. Some of them have limits because of a physical issue. Some of them, it's the season of life that you're in right now that is its own limit. Some of us have financial limitations. And so rather than trying to always push beyond those limits, there are times when we just need to embrace that those limits are actually a governor on our lives. And they're part of what actually can keep us healthy if we will pay attention and honor the limits that God has given us. But I think when you're a leader, you always tend to push the limits, and that's not always healthy.
So how do you know when to push the limits and when not to?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah. I think one is you have to slow down enough to actually be reflective and ask, what is God calling me to do that, maybe would push a limit? And what is in the book Essentialism, Greg McKeown uses this phrase, what are the hell yeses of my life? What are the things that are the compelling God calling yes that I should say, okay? But then a lot of it, honestly, is white noise. It's clutter. It's things I can do, but not really my must do. And I think part of what I try to help people do when I do their life plan is to really define what are the must do's of your life. And those ought to give you the tracks to run on and maybe probably indicate where you should bounce up against a limit. But here's my experience. I think those of us who tend to violate limits, we don't just do it in one area. We tend to do it in all the areas, right? And so I think it's like, I want to have a healthy rhythm, and I'm committed to a healthy rhythm, but sometimes God will call me to sacrifice and to extend for a season or to take on a new project. But I have to slow down and be reflective to really discern what is God actually calling me to, and does it align with my gifts? So one of the things I've done in my life is I've developed an opportunity filter. And that filter gives me a set of criteria for which helps me discern, like, what are the things I should say yes to and what are the things I should say no to?
Yeah, that's great.
And you say yes and you say no based off of a defined vision you already have for your life, or just based off of how you're feeling in that season, that for what
no,
you
I
should
don't.
do?
I rarely do it off of I rarely do it off my feelings in the moment, because I often can't trust my feelings. As a leader, I want to say yes to everything. So I've defined a life purpose. I have a life manifesto that are a set of guiding values for me. And then I use that opportunity filter. And one of the things I think has been most helpful for me, Charles, is I am learning to never say yes in the moment. Because often in the moment, I'm not fully aware of what I'm saying.
Can you say that again? Can you say that again?
I think
we all need to hear this.
Never say yes in the moment, to always put space between someone's request and my commitment to fulfill that. Because sometimes it's not things I should say yes to. And sometimes I say yes because I'm a people pleaser. I want their approval, or it seems like a fun opportunity. But the second thing is that sometimes I don't fully understand what I'm saying yes to, right? Like, how many times have you said yes, and then when you fully understand all that's being asked of you, like you go, oh my gosh, why in the world did I do that?
Why y'all keep staring at me?
This is the first time I've looked at
man talk.
It's the first time I've looked at you.
Let that man talk. Y'all looked at each other and rolled your eyes twice.
No.
And then this time y'all both looked.
No.
Lance, I feel like I may have an issue with this, but this is powerful stuff. Keep talking. Keep talking.
Well, I was going to say that Greg McKeown has another great principle that's been very helpful for me. He says, whenever you agree to something and you take on a new project, from the very beginning, always add 50% to it, to whatever you think it's going to take to do it. Like it could be financial costs, could be time, right? Anytime we say yes to something, there's always more involved than we initially think. And so think about remodeling a room in your house. It's always going to take longer. It's always going to cost more than you initially think. And he said, even when you have experience with something, it always takes 50% longer than you think it is, because we go into it, we forget how bad it was the first time we did it, and we kind of embellish the past, make it better than it actually is. And so for me, a lot of this has to do with just slowing down and going, okay, I need to really reflect on, is this first something God's asking me to do? And is it fit with who I am and what my best gifting is? And do I have the space to actually take this on? And so creating a slowed down reflection has been so helpful for me.
Oh, that is so good. Wow.
Which really is one of the big things I feel like your book Replenish really hit on, which was the first book you wrote coming out of this whole experience and all your coaching. And you were, I believe, in the middle of that book, or it had just come out when you started working with us at Thomas Road.
I think it had been out a little bit,
it had just come out
very long. But
well,
the interesting thing about that book is it was written really out of my own journey. And I would describe Replenish as Lance wrestling through a lot of questions. And I would say back then, I'm not sure I had a ton of answers. I had some clues and hints of a different kind of life, but it was Lance at a very soul fundamental level wrestling with becoming a different kind of person. And because I was so driven, so type A, so task oriented, so doer, so filled with ambition. And I think in ministry, often our ambition has a shadow side to it, right? So when it's godly and it's governed by the Holy Spirit and it's humble, it can do great things for God. It's what the ancient church fathers used to call a fire in your belly. It's what motivates you and what drives you forward. But the shadow side is that my ambition, oftentimes, if I'm really honest, is about my need to be known, my need to be a success, my need to make a name for myself. And so my ambition gets hijacked by my ego, and then it becomes, very unhealthy. And so in those years of my life, I was trying to wrestle through some of these things that I felt like God was undoing. And if the Lord shined the spotlight on one thing the most as I was coming out of Saddleback, it was the shadow side of my ambition. And some deconstruction taking place as I wrote the Replenish book. And again, I think there's helpful stuff in there, but I had probably as many questions as I had answers in those early days. Now, over 17 years, I feel like I've learned a lot and gained more wisdom around how to actually live from a healthy soul. But in those early days, it was pretty raw.
Well, I loved the rawness because it spoke straight into my soul. And I probably need to go back and start all over on that book, because I think it has a refresher. It has to be in the top 10 life-changing books of my entire life and ministry, because and you talk about that shadow side of ambition. You know, the hard part is finding that balance between doing something and also, you know, feeling motivated and even God calling you to do it. But at the same time, there's always that selfish ambition side, I guess the worldly side of our hearts that wants it to succeed, not just for the glory of God, but also for our own glory. And living the life of an artist is really, that's a very vivid picture of that kind of thing. Because, you know, you got to post things on social media. If you don't have a lot of followers, then you're not going to get a lot of success. If you don't have your own business, same story. And at the same time, you have to have that success in order to succeed even a little bit. But on the flip side of that, there's this, there's the dark side of it. And I guess my question for you, Lance, would be, how on earth do you find the balance to that?
Such a thin line.
Yeah, because you can't promote things.
I work with a lot of leaders, and so my observation would be they are tilted strongly on the side of go hard, you know, push, succeed, all of that. And I think, again, it could be noble, but I think you got to step back and go, so why am I feeling the need to push and promote so much on social media? Is it really motivated by a kingdom, you know, desire, or how much of this is about me? And again, I think part of it is slowing down. And I think you have to really be honest with this, you have to grow in self-awareness. And you can't grow in self-awareness unless you do some of the hard internal soul work and you become more introspective around, like, yeah, what really drives me and what's behind why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I love this quote I use a lot in my ministry, that self-awareness is your best defense against self-deceit. And I think for a lot of leaders that I work with, their lack of self-awareness is actually the lid to their leadership. Everybody
so self-awareness is the best defense
against self-deceit. To living in denial, living with blind spots around how I come across, how I lead, how I step on people, how I always posture in a conversation. And so a lot of leaders have blind spots, but, you know, and again, it takes a lot of courage to lean in and go, hey, I want you to help me with my blind spots. I think every leader, especially the higher you go up in leadership, you know, we always talk about having a person or two who's going to help you stay accountable. I think that's not enough when you're a big leader. I think when you're a big leader, you've actually got to grab a couple people by the collar, look them in the eye and go, hey, there is too much at stake in my life for me to blow myself up. And so if you see anything in my life that just doesn't smell right, like I'm manipulating, I'm exaggerating, I want you to call me on it, because, and I don't want you to just feel permission. I want you to feel responsibility, because I don't want to blow up my life. And so one of the questions I often ask leaders is, who in your life can rebuke you? I mean, really, who have you said, I want you to feel such permission and authority that if I get off track, I want you to actually correct me and rebuke me? You know, whenever Proverbs talks about correction or rebuke, it's always seen as a gift. But I think one of the dangers for a lot of big leaders is they just live in isolation. And their ambition, the shadow side of their ambition, runs amok. And man, have we seen that play out in all the scandals over the last decade, right?
Oh, goodness.
Gifted people who lost their way, but had nobody in their life tell them the truth. They weren't listening to anybody, and they were building this thing. And at the end of the day, the thing they were building was really a tribute to themselves. And it's all crumbled. And the collateral damage has been enormous. And so, you know, I've had this message that I've been sharing around the country called Making Ministry Noble Again. Because in 1 Timothy 3, Paul talks about that anybody who desires to be an overseer or a leader in the church desires a noble. The word it's the Greek word kalou. It means attractively good. And the truth is, the reputation of the clergy in this country is in the toilet, and it's declining every year. And a lot of it has to do with stuff that we've brought on ourselves. And I'm just going like, what's it going to take for us to make ministry attractively good again? And we have two choices. Either we can lower the bar and just go, hey, all that stuff in 1 Timothy 3 about godly character and personal holiness, none of that really matters. Or we can say, no, those are actually timeless, permission to play qualities that are the entrance requirements for ministry, and we can call ourselves up to a higher and more noble way of living. But some things have to change, and business as usual is just going to lead to more scandal. Sorry, I just feel like I just got kind of heavy there.
That is just
no.
That is unbelievable.
Awesome stuff. If you don't have him come to this worship conference in June, I'm just kidding.
Okay,
no, seriously.
Can I share one more thing
let's
on
take
this
a break.
point?
Yeah.
Because I think this is really important. I think when you're a leader and you have this fire in your belly, you want to do something significant. Where it gets hijacked is it begins to be about me and my need to be known or seen as a success. But I was reading in 1 Thessalonians where Paul says, and he uses the word ambition. And so it's a word like for a leader, you go, okay, I want to pay attention. Paul's talking about ambition. What do I do with this? And you know what Paul says? Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. Mm-hmm. Really, Paul? Like that's what you're calling me to?
That's it. And wow.
And so what I find myself saying to leaders is like, instead of trying to become epic and world changing and next level, how about if you just nailed Tuesday? How about if you just crush a great life on Thursday? And I feel like we've been so driven to become epic and successful that we have not had the discipline of a daily great life. And it's interesting because Paul makes it missional in the passage. He says, because if you'll make it your ambition to lead a quiet life, he says you will win the respect of outsiders. So maybe what we need is not more, leaders who have 100,000 followers on Instagram or 10,000 likes, but what if actually they just lived a really great life in their local communities, and they live life in such a way that their families and their churches and their communities could respect them? Like, what if that became the real drive? So
talk about counterculture, right? That is
in every way. I mean, okay. Well, let's take a break because I got 57,000.
I know we have to come back with Lance Witt because we have some more questions for him, especially when it deals with some of these books that you've written. I know you've written 3 books, but please stay with us through the break. We'll be right back on the Charles Billingsley podcast.
Welcome back to the Charles Billingsley podcast. We are here with our friend Lance Witt.
Unbelievable wisdom here we're hearing. So stay with us.
Like a fire hydrant.
Yeah. Grab a notepad. If you're not driving, if you are driving, remember to come back to this later.
Yeah, because it's going to be, it'll be right here.
Yeah.
Waiting for you.
So Lance, we've discussed a lot of the principles that you've talked about in Replenish, and as you've refined those over the years. One of your other books, High Impact Teams, which I think most of our teams actually at our church have gone through and read. Yeah. What are you can give me a few of each. I'm going to ask you two. What are some quick signs of healthy teams, and what are some quick signs or warning signs of unhealthy teams?
Okay. Well, let me, if I can, just give you the quick backstory, because most people don't know this about why I actually wrote this book. So
yeah, we'd love to know.
Replenish, I was learning to talk about rhythms and healthy rhythms and Sabbath and, rest and stuff. So I remember I was teaching a group of young hotshot megachurch pastors at a retreat up in Breckenridge, Colorado. There were about a dozen of us around the table. I had just done a teaching on Sabbath, and I said, "Hey, any feedback, questions, discussion?" And this young pastor, he goes, "Here's my honest feedback." He goes, "This lesson is exactly why I try to keep guys like you away from my staff." And he said, "A bunch of my younger staff, they don't need more time off or more Sabbath. They need to learn how to work hard." And I had felt that from pastors before, but I'd never had a pastor so directly come at me. And so I was sort of scared. And so my comeback to him was, how about if you deal with your underperforming staff members rather than ignore a biblical command? And I said,
wow,
yes.
Zing.
You do need to deal with the younger staff who don't want to work hard, but man, Sabbath is it made God's top 10. Like to ignore that feels like a pretty, big deal. So but it got me to thinking like that my issues coming out of Saddleback were driven, type A, workaholic are not everybody's issues. And that some people they need to learn how to really be productive and to steward well, like their church staff position. Like people give their tithes and offerings to pay my salary, and there's a stewardship issue in that. And so I began to dream about a book where we could talk about both health and high performance, and that the real synergy comes when we're focused on relationships and results. And so the premise of high impact teams is, how do we go hard after both? And I always tell pastors, like, you have a bent to one side or the other. You're either bent on the performance side or the health side. But if you want to have a great team, you have to go hard after both. And so anyway, that's kind of the premise of the book. So Adam, to go back to your question, I think signs when teams are healthy, and again, I'm talking about, like, I would say spiritually healthy, not just emotionally healthy, but I think one of them is that we actually talk about our spiritual lives. One of the chapters in the book, I talk about making better Christians, not just better leaders. I think healthy teams, like, we talk about where we are with the Lord. We talk about what I'm learning, how I'm growing. We are interested in each other's spiritual lives. I think healthy teams know how to resolve conflict together. Like, we are able to sit down like grown adults and have mature conversations. I think healthy teams, the vibe that you feel is we care just as much about what we want for you as what we want from you. Like, we care about your family, your pace of life, you being able to take vacation, investing in your marriage. That matters as much to us as you getting your to-do list accomplished. So I think healthy teams do that. I think healthy teams also, though, have really clear roles and responsibilities. Like, I'm really clear about what my job is and what's the win of my job. I think healthy teams provide good coaching. I think one of the things I've noticed in the years I've been in ministry is most churches have never really trained people how to manage well. We weren't taught that, right? So, like, how we help people be clear about expectations, how we coach them when they're not performing well, how we get them back on track and aligned with the vision of the church, and how as a manager, I run interference for them on the team, and they feel like, as their boss, I'm an advocate for them. I think when it comes to, unhealth, it's a lot of the opposite, right, of those kinds of things. Like, we don't have honest conversations. We suffer from what I call terminal niceness. Like, we're very polite in the room, in the meeting with people, but then once we get out in the hallway, the trash talk begins. Dysfunction is sometimes because we just operate in silos and we think, hey, that's not my department. I don't like. I got all I can deal with over here. I don't have time to really care about what's going on with your team. Gossip obviously is a sign of dysfunction. Another thing I feel like is a sign of dysfunction is when we're not allowed to really have candid feedback, or we don't do honest evaluation on things. Sometimes you'll have the leader who is so insecure that they become the bully in the room in that moment and just shut everything down. And people turtle up, and so they just withdraw. And what they feel is it's not safe to actually share your honest opinions here. The last one I would mention is just insecurity. I see this all the time, how it creates unbelievable dysfunction when you have an insecure leader, and people can't show up honestly because the insecurity of the leader tends to just override everything in the culture. So those are, to me, those would be a few of the signs of toxicity inside of a team culture.
Wow. So follow up to that. Sorry, guys. I don't mean to
go for
take over. Insecurity plagues everyone. Everyone has a certain level of insecurity about something. What
Absolutely.
In your talking with leaders and your research and study of your own self and observing leaders and teams, what is the most beneficial antidote to dealing with insecurity?
I think that, to me, if I were to say my own journey, the number one thing was Lance creating space and leaning into trying to understand both my really positive traits, but also the things that can plague me. So I think one of the biggest things is you need to understand your genogram, and you need to understand your family of origin and the narrative or the story that you picked up early on in your life. And so I've been able to now think about this a lot, and I can tell you the number one script I picked up, and it was from my dad, who was a great Christian man, but for his generation, responsibility and work was the highest of value. So the script I picked up early on was work hard, be responsible, achieve. That's how you succeed, and that's how you get loved. Well, when that's the script you live your entire life by, you're only as good as your latest achievement. And so you're always pushing and driving. And sometimes then it creates this insecurity, because if you criticize me or you bring constructive criticism to me, I hear that. You may mean it on a scale of 1 to 10. You may mean it as a 2-level comment, but I take it as an 8 or a 9, because now you're threatening that story of I'm not enough, and I've got to always succeed and win to ever be enough. And so I think leaning in and creating the space, and I think for some leaders, compulsive busyness in their life is what keeps them from ever dealing honestly with some of the broken stuff in their soul.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Excuse me. We're going to have to close this thing down here. I feel like we're just getting started. We may have to bring you back on, Lance.
I think so.
But real quick, I want to get to the last two things, because I really think that people need to know how to find your books.
Yes.
Obviously, Apple Books, iBooks, whatever it's called.
Amazon.
Amazon. The digital downloads, you can get them in audio form. I just checked. You can find these. Are they also in bookstores and physical copies?
I'm sure they are in some. I would probably say your best bet is to just go through Amazon or get downloaded on Kindle. Would probably be
Kindle.
But yeah, I'm sure, my mom's bookstore probably has them. So
yeah. Well, the main thing is, however you like to read your books, I would suggest you buy Lance Witt books with the ability to make highlights and notes, because this man will make you reconsider just about everything you do and the motives behind what you do. Which brings me to the latest book you've written. It's called Your One Life. Own it, live it, love it. And I've downloaded it. I've got the audio version of it also. But can you just point out a few highlights of this book? There's several parts to it. First part is crafting the life you long to live. The second part is life's operating system, a healthy soul. The third part is it's about time. The fourth part is enjoying life with God. And the last part is practicing the presence of people.
Yuck.
Yeah, all this stuff basically is just convicting my soul, even reading the titles. But a couple of little a couple of little things that I would like to ask you about, Lance. When it came to writing this book, are you aiming this book towards leaders or anybody?
Yeah, this book would really be aimed toward anybody who would be a Christ follower and wants to steward well the one and only life they're going to have. And, I'm now in my 60s, and, the older you get, the more you can almost hear the sweep of the second hand of life as it ticks down. And you begin to realize like you've only got a certain number of days left. And I there's this little app I discovered when I was writing the book that will calculate, like if you live to be a certain age, it'll calculate how many days, hours, all that. And my dad died a little over a year ago. He was 85. And so I just thought, well, what if I live to be 85? And when I looked at that's 20 plus years of life still left, and it's a lot of days. But what really struck me is the app also shows you, based on what you said, how much of your life have you already lived? And at the point I did this with the app, 72% of my life was already gone. Now that's assuming I live to be 85. I might not live that long. And so just this reality, like, hey, you only get one shot at this life. Yeah. There's no reincarnation, no do-overs, no mulligan. Like, you get one chance. And what a tragedy it would be to take the one and only life you're ever going to get and not really live it well. And so kind of the signature verse is Psalm 90:12, which is, Lord, teach us to number our days that we may have a heart of wisdom, right? One of the translations says, teach us to realize how brief life really is. But give us a heart of wisdom, like help us to know how to navigate life. And so I wanted, as someone who's been on the planet 6 decades, I kind of envisioned, Charles, if I were to sit down with one of my kids and have lunch, or even one of my grandkids now, and I were to talk to them about what is it going to take for you to really live a life that you long to live, that God has intended for you to live, what would I share with them? And so this book contains kind of is kind of my life message about what I would share with someone about how to live an amazing, rich life.
Beautiful. Just beautiful. I can't wait to read it. I can't. I need it. It's a beautiful thing just to hear you talk, Lance. You truly are a guy who takes care of his soul, who's learned how to take care of his family. And you've found a wonderful balance in your life, which is something that I've always struggled with. And I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with, because we, even under the heading of doing this for God, let's be honest, a lot of what we do is just for personal ambition. We want to look good, and we want to be wealthy, and we want to be wise, and we want to do all that we do so that others will admire us and praise us. And you've struck a great balance between all that I think is incredible, man. And I'm hoping that when people hear this podcast, they'll be inspired to do the same.
Right.
And I hope people are not, I don't want people to be buried like with guilt or shame, or like, oh man, I suck, or I'm not enough. Like,
I only was for the first half hour, but I'm getting better.
After we took the last break, you got better.
Yeah, after the last break, I went to the restroom and cleared my head. I'm back.
I just want people to hear like hope. And there is a way to do life that really can experience the abundance that Christ talked about. I always think about Deuteronomy when the Lord is offering to Israel, like, if you'll come back to me, I'll bless you, I'll prosper you, I'll protect you from your enemies, I'll give you bumper crops. And then he says these words, and I've held on to these words for 15 plus years. Now, what I'm commanding you today is not beyond your reach. It's not like, it is available. And he says, it's not like it's up in the heavens and someone has to go up and get it, or it's across the ocean, someone has to get in a boat and go retrieve it. He says, no, it is very near you. It's in your mouth and your heart to obey it. And I just think about like, no, God has actually given us great principles and truths that if we will align our lives to them, and it takes work and it's time, but there is the possibility of living this rich, abundant life. So I just hope people hear the hope and the possibility in that.
Fantastic.
Absolutely. And we do. No, don't forget your one life. Own It, Live It, Love It by Lance Witt. I would encourage you before you finish this podcast to download that book now.
Yeah. And get your notepad, pen.
Oh, yeah.
And also get a friend. Get a friend. That's what I loved about Lance. You said even in this, I was reading the high impact teams, don't do this alone. Do it with other people. Because how can you even start the accountability and all the different things that you say in the book unless you're right there with somebody else? If I'm all by myself doing it, that's not how life's supposed to be lived. So thank you even for that encouragement.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.
And here's the good thing about, I was going to say, here's the good thing people tell me about my books. For those of you who are not real avid readers, the chapters are really short. So if the content sucks, at least the chapters are short. So.
I love short chapters.
And you know what's funny, Lance, is oftentimes we ask people at the end of the podcast if there was one thing left to do that they feel like they were made to do, what would it be? I honestly feel like you're doing exactly what you were made to do.
Thank you.
You answered that. You answered our last question with your first comment on that moment on the plane a long time ago. And so I'm not even going to ask you that question because I know the answer.
Well, thank you. I dodged another question.
Hey, we love you. Would you consider coming back on with us again sometime soon?
Absolutely. To hang out with you three guys, I would pay you even more than I paid this time.
No, I'll remember that.
All right. Well, thanks, buddy, for your time. We love you. Tell Connie we love her, and I hope to see you soon.
All right.
See ya.